"Is that so?" Fraser replied, as he helped Natalia to her feet. He didn't care about any seemingly prestigious businessmen. He only cared about the welfare of his wife. Once he had sat her carefully on a chair, he walked towards Simon, his eyes cold. Simon's confidence began to evaporate again. "Don't come near me," he wailed, too afraid to run. "You must be Natalia's old classmate, right?" he asked, his voice calm. "Don't worry, I won't kill you now, but let this be a warning to you." Simon stared at him, his eyes as wide as saucers. Fraser stepped close to Simon, his gaze steely. "If you ever so much as harm a hair on her head, I will come back and finish you within the hour." He was standing so close to Simon that their noses were almost touching. Simon nodded wordlessly, sweat pouring down his back. He didn't move a muscle until he heard Fraser's car leave the parking lot. Fraser took Natalia straight home. He put her straight into bed, the alcohol sending her to sleep almost instantly. He didn't even get the chance to give her a glass of water. When Sheila arrived that evening after work, Natalia was still asleep. Fraser told her about what had happened. Overlooking the part where Fraser had saved his wife, Sheila focused on how he had let her get drunk in the first place. "How could you let her get so drunk?" she demanded. "What kind of husband are you?" Fraser shrugged. "You think you've been quite clever this time," she growled. "But if anything happens to Natalia, I won't let you forget this." Worried about Natalia, Sheila decided to sleep on the couch. She went to bed early because she still had to work the next day, but she was determined to be there for her friend. She assigned Fraser the unenviable task of looking after her through the night. He was lucky as she didn't wake up until the following day. Natalia woke up with no headache. As she lay in bed, memories of the previous day's events unfolded before her. She looked over to find Fraser lying next to her, snoring softly. She took his hand without waking him and held it, enjoying the comfort it gave her. It was only a few minutes later when he woke up. As he opened his eyes groggily, worried about how she might feel, a sharp nudge in the ribs brought him up and about surprisingly quickly. "Fraser, did you hit someone?" she asked, hoping she might have misremembered the previous day's events. Her blurred version of events saw him barging into the room and beating up two grown men. She had drunk enough wine to know that her memory was unreliable. As Fraser didn't look like he would answer her, she tried again. "Are you ignoring me? Do you know who those men were?" she added. "They weren't out to do the kind of business you had in mind," he said, wishing he could have a glass of water to help him come around. Natalia wasn't listening. "You spoiled everything!" she shouted. "After the last glass of wine, we were going to sign a contract. Yet you came in and ruined everything. Why did I think it was such a good idea to bring you along?" Fraser didn't reply. He knew it was pointless. "I've only been in the job a few days, and already I've messed everything up," she said in despair. "Brett's going to fire me." As Fraser tried to comfort her, she shrugged his arms off her. "Get out of here! I don't want to see you!" She shouted through tears of rage. As far as she was concerned, the world had just ended. The two other men at the meeting had been executives of Starlight Entertainments and Mendelsohn Industries, two companies that dwarfed Frandotech. She was convinced they wouldn't let the matter drop so easily. Fraser got out of bed. As he walked toward the bedroom door, Natalia's phone rang. "It's Brett," she said, looking at him in despair. "What are you standing there for? Go and make me a coffee." As soon as he had left the room, she answered the call. "Brett?" she said, trying to sound as charming as possible. How are you? Good, but more to the point, how are you? He replied. Are you able to come into the office today? There are a lot of things here for you to take care of. She looked at her phone in surprise. It seemed as if he wasn't blaming her and still wanted her to work for him. Oh, yes, of course, she said, the surprise making her stammer. Only if you're sure. After all, my business meeting didn't go according to plan yesterday. Don't worry about that, said Brett. It's my fault for making you work with such rude clients, he added. I know that you're doing a really great job. You haven't forgiven me just for Fraser's sake, have you? She asked. I know how important that deal was for you. No, of course not, said Brett, pretending to sound surprised. I know he's a friend of mine, and I know that he's your husband, but we both know he's not exactly a go-getter. I have him delivering flyers because that's all he's good at. I actually thought you're doing really well here on your own. Now, do you think you can get here before noon? Sure. Bye, she replied. She hung up her phone and looked at it, a puzzled look on her face. On the other end of the phone, Brett hung up and burst out laughing. Natalia was still looking at her phone when Fraser returned with a cup of coffee. Was Brett okay? He asked her, already knowing the answer. What do you care? She retorted, taking the coffee off him. She sipped the hot drink and smiled. Not only was she lucky enough to be beautiful, but it also appeared that she was pretty good at her job. It seemed that her new boss was prepared to overlook the previous day's events. She put the coffee down and got out of bed. Fraser was getting dressed. Fraser, she began, giving him an icy stare she reserved purely for him. What are you doing for Brett today? Delivering flyers to your friends? With that, she walked out of the bedroom and slammed the door shut behind her, the loud bang echoing throughout the entire house. Fraser smiled bitterly. He was happy that she was taking her new job seriously, but Brett had overstepped the mark during his conversation with her. He decided to go and see Brett again. An hour later, Fraser stormed into Brett's office for the second time in 2 days, but he wasn't quite polite this time. He sat himself down in Brett's chair, making Brett sit uncomfortably on the couch in the corner of the room. As Fraser glared at him, Brett felt like a child who had been sent to the principal's office for bad behavior. Brett, what are you doing? He asked incredulously. You didn't have to belittle me like that on the phone to Natalia today. Do you know what she said to me after she hung up? Brett gulped. He hadn't expected Natalia to take his words so literally. I'm sorry, he said sadly. But we've got more important things to worry about. You know, that business deal I told you about? Go on, said Fraser. The location has been arranged. But are you sure you can sort all this out? They are 2 big companies after all, he said. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing, said Fraser. He stood up. One more thing. Why don't you tell your wife the truth? Asked Brett. He looked serious. Fraser wasn't sure what Brett was asking about. Being married to Natalia, or the matter of the private room the day before. The time's not right yet, he replied. I'm waiting for the day when she wants to believe me. That afternoon, Fraser, Brett, Ryan, and Ox walked into the luxurious Twin Palms Hotel and made their way to the penthouse suite. It was the location Brett had referred to when they had met that morning. Simon Draper was waiting for him. Only this time, he was prepared. There were more than 10 bodyguards in the room, with another 5 in and around the hotel grounds. Mr. Phelps and Mr. Bell were with him. The only difference from their last meeting with Fraser was the large bandage on the head of Mr. Phelps. Simon watched them arrive, a look of distrust on his face. As soon as they were in the room, he went into the corridor to check with his security guard if Fraser had brought any more men with him. Satisfied with the guard's response, he walked back into the room.
"Fraser, did you think we brought you here today to negotiate with you?"
he asked.
"Because I'm afraid you're mistaken. You've been tricked."
Simon had told Brett that it was a negotiation, purely to lure the snake out of its hole. But as far as he was concerned, the negotiations had ended as soon as Fraser had set foot into the room. Brett shot a worried glance toward Fraser, convinced they had walked straight into a trap. Simon smiled, convinced that Fraser was nothing more than someone good at martial arts. He had no idea that he had defeated Three Eyes and replaced the leader as the head of the Heavenbreaker gang. Nor did he know anything about the backgrounds of Brett, Ryan, and Ox. Fraser sat down and crossed his legs, appearing not to feel threatened at all.
I see you're making yourself comfortable,"
said Simon, his smile replaced with a look of disdain. He turned to Brett.
"I didn't realize that this man was your bodyguard."
He paused.
"I've been trying to work out why you haven't fired Natalia after her dreadful behavior yesterday, and I've come to the conclusion that you've kept her on purely because you're in love with her," he said.
He turned back to Fraser.
"I think you need to be careful where you place your loyalties," he said. "It turns out that Brett is only friends with you because of your wife."
Fraser jolted. He was about to stand up, but Ryan put a calming hand on his arm.
"Don't rise to the bait," he said quietly. "He's just trying to get a reaction out of you."
Simon stepped back, unsettled by how quickly Ryan had discovered his plan. He decided to try a different idea.
"I see you have more than one henchman," he said,
hoping that Ryan would not appreciate being belittled in any way.
"Yes, and I'm prepared to rip out all your teeth if I have to," said Ryan, not listening to his own advice.
It was Fraser's turn to calm Ryan down. "Don't listen to him," he warned. He turned to Simon and studied him for a long time, not saying anything. He could see Simon getting increasingly uncomfortable. "I let you off lightly yesterday," he said. "But seeing as you're after more of the same, I won't show you any mercy today."
"Mercy?" said Mr. Bell.
He laughed.
"It's you who won't be shown any mercy today."
The security guards all started to laugh with him, convinced that only 4 of them would be no match for the sheer number of people they would be tackling. They were convinced that half of their colleagues wouldn't even be needed.
"Boss, don't waste your time with them," said Ryan, rolling up his sleeves. "I'll kill this dog first."
Simon had provoked Ryan's boss enough, and he felt like he deserved a beating. "Save your strength," said Fraser.
"You want to hit me?"
said Simon.
"With all these men?"
But he didn't get to finish. Ryan rushed toward him and punched him so hard that 4 teeth fell out of his mouth.
"Damn it!"
shouted Simon.
"How dare you hit me? My teeth!"
he said, as he caught them in his hands. He looked at his security guards.
"What are you waiting for?"
he shouted. The guards rushed toward Ryan. Ox got to 2 of them before they could even reach their target, flooring them with 1 good punch each. They fell to the ground, wailing. It took less than 2 minutes for Ryan and Ox to floor the entire group of guards. Fraser and Brett didn't even stand up to help. They knew they weren't needed. Simon watched the whole affair unfold in total horror. His plan had backfired spectacularly.
"Quick!"
he slurred through a mouthful of blood to the guards in the corridor.
"Get everybody in here!"
The rest of the guards stormed into the room, but each and every one of them reached the same fate as the first. Within 5 minutes, they were all on the floor. Some were unconscious. Some were covered in blood, but each one had been defeated. Even Brett was impressed. "These guys are good," he said to Fraser as he watched Ryan and Ox at work. "Where did you find them?" You'll know soon enough," said Fraser as he stood up. "Ryan, Ox, this way," he said. "It's time to get down to business." Fraser walked up to the three businessmen who had taken no part in the fight. Fraser patted Simon on the face. "Are you okay?" he asked, not interested in his answer the slightest bit. Simon wiped the blood off his face and looked at Mr. Phelps and Mr. Bell for help.
"I wouldn't be too smug just yet,"
said Mr. Bell, but it was all bravado. He was still angry about the events of the day before. He intended to get revenge on Natalia's company, but not by fighting. His grudge against Fraser was something he intended to deal with another day.
"Fraser, Brett,"
said Simon.
"You may have defeated my bodyguards, but I strongly advise you leave my colleagues and me alone. Your business empire will collapse without our companies to trade with."
He stared hard at Fraser, deciding whether to play his trump card straight away or leave it a while longer. "Call your office," Fraser said. "Ask them if there's anything left of your companies. You have 5 minutes." Simon swallowed. He had no idea that things would turn out this way. He looked at Mr. Phelps and Mr. Bell, a look of panic in his eyes. Ryan looked at his watch. "What are you waiting for?" he asked. "You only have 4 minutes now." Simon picked up his phone and dialed his personal assistant. He listened carefully, unable to get a word in as his assistant spoke to him in complete panic. "Simon, I'm so glad you called," Fraser heard Simon's assistant say. "Someone has hacked our confidential files and stolen them." Mr. Phelps picked up his phone and dialed his office too.
"What do you mean? Someone has broken into the safe and stolen all my valuables?" he shouted.
Mr. Bell received similar news.
"That's impossible," he shouted down his phone. "There's no way in the world my stockholders would sell all their shares in complete panic."
The three men looked at one another in complete despair. Fraser poured himself a glass of water and sat down with a smug smile as he watched the three businessmen learn that their companies faced ruin. He took a sip, put the glass down carefully, and gazed at Simon. "Is there anything you'd like to say to me?" he asked.
"Oh, Mr. Macklemore, I'm so sorry," said Simon,
looking genuinely remorseful.
"If you let me go, I promise never to behave like this again."
"Well, that depends on what you say to Natalia when you call her," said Fraser. "You'll tell her the truth about your intentions yesterday and face the consequences when she learns how you treated her."
"Of course," he said. "I'll do it right away."
He took out his phone and dialed her number.
"Hello?"
said a very nervous Natalia.
"Natalia, I'm calling to apologize for my behavior yesterday," said Simon.
"No, it's Fraser's fault, not yours," said Natalia. "He's the one who should be apologizing to you."
No need," said Simon. "He did nothing wrong. Mr. Bell and I plotted against you, and if it hadn't been for Fraser, the day might have had a very nasty outcome. Will you forgive me?"
Of course," she said, not listening to him anymore. Had she wrongly blamed her husband for the events of the day before? "But why is Simon suddenly apologizing to me?" she thought. As Simon hung up the phone, he looked inquiringly at Fraser.
"Was that okay?"
he asked. "Get lost," said Fraser. The three men didn't need to ask twice. They ran out of the room, having learned their lesson well. Fraser looked at Brett, who was staring back at him in shock. "What's going on?" he asked. But Fraser only smiled at him.
Hey guys, Fraser here. Listen to the full episode of Unraveling the Son-In-Law exclusively on Pocket FM app. Click the link in description to install the app now.